Okay, well, hi everyone, and thank you very much for watching or listening. Liam Hartree here today with another episode of the Simply Inspired podcast, and I'm really honored and blessed and privileged today to welcome a very special guest. It is three-time Olympian and 2016 silver medalist Gevvie Stone, a professional rower. She has represented her country at the highest level, being world champion, being voted Athlete of the Year, has some incredible accolades to her name in both the single and double rowing events. In addition to that, she's also an emergency room physician. Correct me if that's not entirely technically correct, but actually juggled medical school as well as her rowing career at one point. Likes to make a difference. So as always, today we won't just be talking about the details of sports. We'll be going a little bit deeper into the mindset, a little bit of inspiration for people who are chasing their dreams, and finding out a bit more about Gary's life. So biggest thing to say is just thank you for coming on the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, it'll be fun to do.
Absolutely. Well, brilliant. So getting into it from the beginning. Now, as I said, we'll talk about a bit of everything. We'll talk about obviously the highlights of your career. We'll talk about the medicine, but going back to the early days, I'm sure that you talk about this a lot. You actually come from a rowing family. It's sort of a family affair, as they say. But I'm curious to ask that from a different point of view. Was the expectation that you would follow your parents into their sport always there, or did it sort of come at a later time, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the expectation probably was there at some level, but my parents definitely never forced it upon me. My sister, my brother, and I grew up playing sports. Played youth soccer, youth hockey, youth lacrosse, and I played those sports through middle school. At my school, rowing was kind of I don't know, lacrosse was like the coolest sport to play. And so I loved playing. I was not the best at it by any means, but said, I'm not going to do what my parents did. I'm going to forge my own footsteps. I'm going to stick with my friends. I'm going to keep playing lacrosse. And then as I got older, I realized that I might actually be good at rowing. And so my sophomore year, I told myself that if I made varsity lacrosse, I would keep playing lacrosse through high school. And if I didn't, I would switch to rowing. So I didn't make varsity lacrosse and I finished out the season on JV, but my junior year I started rowing more serious or really started rowing. I had rowed dabbled at my summer camp, but everyone's forced to do it there. So it's not, um, I don't know if I necessarily counted as part of my rowing career, even though it was time in a boat. And I loved it. But my parents, I think one of the reasons I loved it is that it was my own decision to make. And my parents never forced me upon it or signed me up for it without my wanting to do it. And they were like that for all of my siblings. They kind of let us choose it for ourselves, which I think allowed us to make it our own sport and appreciate it for different ways. And now that I'm done it for so long, I love that I can share it with my parents. Uh, and we can talk about rowing for way longer than anyone else at the dinner table wants us to talk about rowing. But at the time when I was growing up, I definitely, that was their thing. I wanted to do my own thing. And they let me come into it on my own, which I really appreciate.
Absolutely, yeah, it's amazing. I love the family dynamic, and it's a wonderful part of the story. Now, in terms of some of your early successes, I just like to get a feel here, not really for one specific event, but just for the time when you really started to excel, you started to do very well, you started to really realize I can go far with this. And I know you touched on that just now with when you made the decision to go headlong into it, but just like I say, more than one event, more like what that time of your life was actually like more broadly, please.
Yeah, so I went to a small all-girls school in Boston, and we had rowing as a sport. It was one of the many sports that the school offered. And my mom was actually the coach. So that was like another interesting, slightly unusual dynamic. My junior year was my first spring rowing. I actually had rowed in the fall, which is a less serious season for us. And in the spring, I made the varsity boat, which was a four. So there were a coxswain and four rowers that made it. So that in itself was kind of a big achievement for my first spring rowing. I had come off swimming, and actually all the swimmers on the team that year did really well because we just came off of with the winter being fit. And then that year we ended up winning nationals, youth nationals. And I don't think at the time we realized how great that was for a small school to win that race. And I think it was, gosh, 20 years ago, and competition was a little bit different then than it is now. There were fewer people rowing, but still, it was a big achievement. And I enjoyed it so much that I realized that I could do it at the college level, especially like going to nationals, even just winning our regional regatta. So I knew that it was something I wanted to do in college. And when I started looking at colleges that spring, I looked at schools that had rowing and were good at rowing. And at that point in my head, it was just something, I'll do this in college. I really like doing it. I seem to be okay at it, and started getting letters from coaches about being recruited. Um, and it was really my freshman year in college. I was in the locker room, and two of my teammates had come off the junior national team, which in the pre-Olympic year races on the Olympic course. So they had raced in the Athens course in 2003. And they were in the locker room talking about how cool it was to race in that course and how they wanted to go to the Olympics. And I remember the thought crossing my mind, oh, other people want to go to the Olympics in this sport too. This is going to be really hard to do. And I had never acknowledged that I wanted to go that far in the sport, to myself or to anyone else. And I don't think I even acknowledged it to anyone else at that point in time. But that was the first like concrete time that I remember. And it's funny because I remember it so vividly, thinking, I want to go to the Olympics in this sport. And I think it might be something that I can do. I think I probably somewhat took it not for granted, but I grew up around parents who were national team rowers. And my mom went to Montreal in 76. My dad would have made the team in 80, but the boycott happened. And so they have friends who are rowers who went to the Olympics. And so in my mind, it was just something that, like, if you kept rowing and you were kind of good at it, like, you'd go to the Olympics. And on a separate note, going to the Olympics was something that I'd wanted to do since I was a kid, because I mean, many kids grow up, and I remember watching figure skating was what I wanted to do originally, watching the Winter Olympics and saying, oh my gosh, that's so cool. I want to do that. So freshman year in college was the first time that those dreams merged, but also became more of a reality, and away from this, like, oh, of course I can do it. Like, maybe this is something I want to do. This is something that every kid wants to do in some unknown sport, to I want to do this in rowing. And I think it's something that I might do, but it's also going to be something that's really hard to achieve.
Absolutely. I love that because you know what? It's the side of things that people don't see. People see the races and people, to some extent, obviously in your community and everything, people will know the work that goes in behind the scenes. But what's going on in your mind and your heart and that time when you made that switch, this is what I want to do. Absolutely brilliant, because it's sort of obviously behind the scenes for everyone else. So that's very cool. Now, obviously, you've achieved a lot. So you were talking about dreams coming true, that concept. And we won't have time to talk about every single one, obviously. So what I thought the best thing to do is just to get your thoughts on what your personal highlights are and why. I know this is a pretty big question. I know this is obviously encompasses quite a broad timeline as well, but it's also the most fun way to do it because we don't know what answer is going to come back. The Olympics, I'd imagine, is obviously part of it, but generally, your proudest moments and why, please, Gevvie.
Yeah. Gosh, you're right. There's so many, I rode for long enough. There's so many great races. I think college, I was with a really special group of rowers my junior year. We were undefeated and we won the NCAA's, which is our national championship, by kind of an insane margin. It was open water by a lot. We had open water 500 meters, which is a quarter of the way into the race. And it's funny because that was probably the first, well, nationals as a high schooler, but that was the first really significant race that I had won. Looking back on the season, actually, the most fun thing was we raced the boys in practice. We would scrimmage them occasionally. And those run race, we'd race every Wednesday. We'd race like a multi-squad race. So the heavyweight men, heavyweight women, and lightweight women would do the same practice the same day. We'd call out varsities against JVs, just kind of which group was your speed. And there was one practice we went out and we were allowed to race the JV lightweight men and the JV lightweight heavyweight men and whatever, a group of men. And we beat them. And that was probably the most fun and most proud I was in all of college, because it was just something that we weren't expected to do. and with a group of people who were working so hard just for the fun of it. I mean, this was a low stakes race. It's just a practice against the boys. But at the same time, being with a group of women who are working so hard together, I think that sticks out in my mind as probably the most special race early in my career. Um, I then went on to race on the under 23 team and won two U23 golds, and then tried out for Beijing and didn't make the team. And after I didn't make the team, I came back to Boston and start medical school. And I told my parents, I'm tried for the Olympic team. I'm not good enough to make it. And that's okay. I won an NCAA championship. I have had a good career. It's okay to switch to medicine, and I have no regrets and a lot to be proud of. They convinced me that I should row in my spare time, which was a great decision. But that fall, I raced a bunch of fall races. They're 3 miles, they're less serious. The biggest of which is Head of the Charles, which is kind of a worldwide regatta, international competitors. It's actually the biggest regatta of any boat class in terms of number of boats and people racing in 2 days, now 3. Anyway, I won that. And I beat a couple of the women who had raced in Beijing, who had lost out on making the team too. And I remember finishing that race and cooling down, paddling back to my boathouse and being told that I won. And I thought my Olympic dream had been over at that point. And that race and winning it reignited it. And not only reignited it because maybe it was there, but gave me the confidence that it was something that might still be within my grasp. So that race is incredibly special for that reason. And then I think the final in London was my first Olympics. I raced the best race of my life. I was 7th, so I won the B final, rowing in 6 boats in a final. And in winning the B final, I got to cross the line first. I beat some women I had never beaten, and it was the biggest stage I could possibly imagine. So to have the best race of my life on the biggest stage I could imagine, and London was a really special Olympics because the Brits understand rowing and love rowing, and the crowds were insane. There were so many people. It was so loud. It was definitely the best group I've competed for. And I was on top of the world. And at that point, being an Olympic podium, doing the Olympic gig again was not even on my radar. I thought, I've done my goal. I've made it to the Olympics. I'm going to go back and finish medical school. And then 4 years later, I was still rowing because I had been told by a few people that, maybe you can be on the podium. This might be something you could do. And it kind of tickled my mind. And I thought, oh gosh, is that true? I still love training. I'm still getting faster. Maybe I do want to give this another shot. So, gosh, we're at 3. The next big race I'd say was 2015, the World Cup in Switzerland. I'm sorry, 2016, the World Cup in Switzerland, which I think is still to date the best race I've ever had in the single. It was the whole field minus Emma Twigg for the Olympic final in 2016, a couple of months before the Olympics. And I had always had I had a terrible start when I started running the single, but my start had gotten better. The middle of my race was the strength, and I had had difficulty finishing a race. And that spring, I really worked on sprinting and just getting rid of all my excess energy, stepping on the gas in that last little bit of the race. And in Switzerland that day, I had the Canadian coming up behind me, and I just said, you know what? I am not going to let Carling past me. And push myself farther than I ever thought I could be pushed. Went beyond as far as how I was rowing, I think, but also what I made my mind and body do. And was finished second, I think. Yes, finished second. And so a great result, but also just a fabulous performance in terms of what I was capable of. And then Rio, of course. So Rio, I won the silver medal, which was incredible. And amazingly enough, I knew that there were 4 of us in contention for a medal the day we went down for the final. And I knew that Kimmy Crow was probably going to win the race, the Australian. So I knew there were 3 of us in contention for 2 medals. And everything, I was so nervous, but things seemed to be falling in the right places. And the luck was on my side in addition to training and speed. Obviously, I medaled earlier in the season. And I remember crossing the halfway point and thinking, I'm supposed to be really tired now. This is really supposed to hurt. And I feel really good. Like I am going to be on the Olympic podium. And so getting kind of knowing that halfway through the race, and of course there's no guarantees, like anything can happen, but I just had a sense halfway through the race really, I think, let me appreciate the second half of the race. And it was really fun. And being on the podium, there's something incredible and almost unbelievable still about working so hard for a goal. Like so many years of training, a lot of decisions made to prioritize rowing. I don't necessarily call them sacrifices because they were my decisions, and rowing was always an option and something that I wanted to do and loved doing. But a ton of hard work and so just almost unbelievable still because it was something that for so long I thought was unattainable. And I couldn't have done it without the support of my teammates and my friends and my family and my dad, who's my coach. At the same time, so much of it was the work that I put in. And so realizing that goal is really, it was just, yeah, it's kind of indescribable being on that podium. Yeah.
Wow. I knew that would be a good answer, but that was a really, really good answer. And thank you for going into so much depth with that, because as I mentioned, it's a big question and it encompasses a
Yeah.
lot of different aspects. I love that story about your parents encouraging you to continue as well. I mean, that's a big one. How we bounce back from defeat. I had that here, but we've covered that. The mindset aspect. There's so many incredible things. You mentioned that it's indescribable, so I won't ask you to put it into words, but these days, walking around as an Olympic medalist, as an Olympian, obviously everyone looks at you and they know that, but from your side, walking around saying to yourself, I'm an Olympian and having achieved that, how does that feel now, obviously a few years later? I know that's a little abstract, but it sounds like it's something that has taken quite a while to almost sink in a way.
Yeah. And I don't even know if it does sink in every day. I think I don't think about it every day, especially in my medical life. And I still row occasionally. I still get out on the river, and every now and then someone like a junior team or junior coach points me out and I think, oh my gosh, that's right. And or I post something on Instagram and people respond um, with positive comments, and it sinks in all over again because it's not the medal's in a box on the shelf on my bookshelf, and I can't remember the last time I got it out for a speech I did in December, but it's not something I look at or take out regularly. And it's funny, new goals crop up and the day to day happens, and you get distracted is probably the wrong word. Um, it's not something I think about every day, but in those moments where it gets refreshed, um, it's still really special, and it's still something I feel very emotional about when I do start really thinking about it. And um, yeah, I think one of the more special things about it now, I mean, that at the moment, it was really that fact that I had achieved something that I'd worked so hard for, and that hard work really not paid off, but just led to this feeling of accomplishment that I think probably will never be topped in some ways. Now, the thing that's most rewarding is that sometimes I think winning that medal enabled me to be in a position, not that I was before, but more in a position to give back to the rowing community and beyond in terms of inspiring other people to set their sights on goals, things that they maybe thought were impossible before, maybe dig a little deeper. And I think that's the really special thing now is that even though I've stopped rowing, I'm still having an impact on the sport and on other people. And that's the most rewarding thing now, I think, is being able to give back to that community. And yeah, I'm pretty lucky to be in the position to do that.
Absolutely. That's a beautiful way that you've put it across, and I can really um, sort of see the emotions and everything in a good way as you talk about that and as you reminisce about that. On the subject of giving back and contributing to people, it's a big part of why I do these interviews in the first place. So at this point, I would like to get your it's another big question, I'm sorry, but to get some of your advice on people who are chasing a dream, whether it's in sports or whether it's in something entirely different, but the principles are always there. People who want to do something like that, work so hard for something for many years, they get there, they're sort of going through that phase of, is this possible for me, is this not possible for me, etc. Or maybe, people who are further along in the journey, but they've had a few discouragements, they're at that point where you weren't and your parents said, no, keep going. You get what I mean with all of this. So just what would be some sort of essential ingredients that you would give to people if they want to achieve a big dream, maybe two or three things, or however much you'd like to share, really?
Yeah, that's certainly a challenging question, and everyone takes their own journeys. I think one of the things I learned in not making the Beijing team is that it's really important to believe in your own ability to achieve anything. In the Beijing quadrennial, or in that year that I did, I really gave up on myself in terms of my ability to make the team. And already by January, February, I think I had put it in my mind that I was in a group of very fast women and I probably wouldn't make it. And believing in yourself doesn't guarantee you anything at all. But if you don't have faith in yourself, you've pretty much eliminated the chances that your dreams will come reality and that you will achieve it. So it's a necessary ingredient. It doesn't guarantee success because obviously you have to put the hard work in, but you have to believe in yourself to make anything happen.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. I think the other one is to make hard work fun. It's a lot easier to work hard at something you love and care about and enjoy. And I think that's one of the things that kept drawing me back to rowing and elite rowing was that I really loved the process. Obviously, we don't get to race much, and the races are really special. We put in a lot of training for the amount of racing we do. It's, I mean, if you add up the racing, it probably adds up to maybe an hour a year. And you're training, physically training 20 hours a week, probably thinking about training, stretching, getting your boat out, doing all the things around training for a full-time job, so 40 hours a week. And if not more. And so it's really lopsided. And I think if anyone looked at those numbers, they'd say you're out of your mind. But it's not if you enjoy the process. And I loved that building towards the goal and that singular focus that the harder I work, the faster I went and the better it went. And the more you embrace it and the more you love it, just the easier it is to do. And I think it's the same way in medicine. I work a lot as a resident, and I think it could be easy to resent that. But it's funny, I walk into the hospital and I'm in a pretty darn good mood because I'm with people that I love working with and doing a job I care about. And it makes the fact that I'm there a lot and working really hard much easier. So I think feeling that inspiration from what you're doing, just the everyday grit and grind of it, makes it's going to be hard, but it makes it so much more fun, so much more enjoyable, and so much easier.
Absolutely. Incredible insight. Thank you. Because again, it was a big question, but it's one of those things where um, people can use that for whatever their dream is, for whatever they are chasing and whatever they're working on. And that was really my aim. As I said, personally, that's why I do these in the first place. So absolutely fantastic answer. We'll come to your medicine and everything shortly because I'd like to talk about that because it's equally important part of your life. The only other thing, though, with rowing itself that you touched on just now was about the mental side, because you've touched on the physical endurance and the pain barriers and the amount of hours that you put in and etc. And I'm fascinated just to touch briefly on the how you would mentally prepare. And when I ask this, certain things come up over and over. Some people talk a lot about visualization and self-affirmations and various mental techniques that they say are very helpful. So does any of that apply to you, when you were competing? Let's just talk about what was going through your mind on the build up to a big race, basically.
Yeah, I think probably all sports, but rowing especially is a really large mental game. I think along the lines of track or swimming or cycling sports where I mean, you're somewhat reactive because you are competing and you're in a competition, but I think different than ball sports in a way, like soccer or basketball. And it's funny because when I give speeches to kids, sometimes I walk in the room and especially people who don't know me expect to have some recognition, some like obvious sign, like, oh, this is an Olympian. We can tell it's an Olympian, and we would recognize her walking down the sidewalk because somehow she looks different. And there's something like a superhero about being an Olympian. And there's really not. I'm tall, I'm 6 feet tall. But aside from that, there is nothing about me physically that I think you would point to and be like, oh my gosh, like that person can do a lot physically. And I think it's because so much of rowing, I mean, you absolutely have to be physically strong, but so much of the strength in it comes from the heart and the head and being good at it and being invested at it, which we've already talked about, and really enjoying what you do and caring about it and wanting to go that extra mile. But also having the mental control to do the same thing over and over every day in practice and in racing. And rowing is a repetitive sport. You put the blade in, you drive it through the water, you pull it out, you go back and you do it again, and you do it 270 times during a race, but a lot more times during every practice. And it's the same thing. And it's amazing how nuanced that little motion can get when you're thinking about all the details and micro movements. Also, when you're thinking just about the physiology. And I think in order to do that over and over again, the mind is critical to be focusing on those motions again and again and again. It's the mind in terms of thinking about the technique, but also the mind in terms of the control to get your body to places where you've never pushed it before. So I think the mind in general, that's a very long-winded answer, saying I think the mind in general is critical to the sport of rowing and to being successful. In terms of preparation, I definitely visualized. My mom actually had us visualize starting in high school. She would have the coxswain cox us through the race, and we would close our eyes and imagine doing it. And the coxswains would time it, and they'd start it when we would start about a race, and they'd finish it about when we'd finish. And they would be talking us through it, and so we'd be visualizing what they were depicting. In college, we did the same thing, or my college coach, Lori, had us do it. And so it was a natural progression to the single to just sit down in a room, close my eyes, and take that time. By the end of my career in the single, I was surprisingly precise in terms of how long it took me to visualize the race. And I would start, and a race takes 7 minutes and 10 seconds to 7 minutes and 40 seconds, let's say. And I was somewhere in the 7 to 8 minute range, like spot on, just always. Sorry, we've got some construction outside, so let me know if
It's okay.
interfering in the background. But I just, in terms of visualizing every stroke, I think going through what you expect of both your mind and your body, because I think I would visualize how the stroke was going to be done and how I wanted to feel, but also acknowledge that I was going to have to push my body into a painful situation and preparing myself for that ahead of time, saying like, this is going to hurt and I am going to be tough enough to push past it. And so it's the preparation for that. And then it's also the self-talk in the race. One of my friends in college did a study on the mental side of rowing in particular, in his senior thesis, was sitting people down for an erg test. The erg is the rowing machine, and he would have them read a script. And so the placebo group didn't read any script. They just got down into this little test, and the control, or the active group, whatever you call it, active action arm, read a script. And the script said, I'm fast. I'm going to go really fast on this. I think I can do it. And they didn't, this is like in the psychiatry lab. Like, they wasn't anything that they were necessarily personally invested in. But the group that read the script went faster compared to their baselines. Even though they didn't, I don't know how much they believed what they were reading. I think just the simple act of saying those words out loud and telling themselves that they could do it helped performance. And I think that just emphasizes how much effect the mind has in everything we do, especially in sports performance. And so not only would I prepare myself for pain, but in the moment, in the race, a lot of what you're doing is positive self-talk and thinking like, I can do this. I'm where I want to be. This feels good. All those positive things. And they're short thoughts when you're in the middle of a race, because I mean, I joke with friends, I can only count to 10. Some of my friends would say, oh yeah, I count to 200 strokes, or I count all the strokes in the race. And I would go, I can only count to 10. Like, there's too much lactic acid. Like, I can't get past 10. Anything in the teens is too complicated for me. So these thoughts are short and sweet. And they're interspersed with almost a meditative mantra. So usually I would go into a race knowing what I wanted to focus on, and I would repeat the same word to myself, if not the whole way down the course, a lot of the course. And because I say that because some of it is counting, you count like 10. I would count 3 sets of 10 strokes at the start, and you count 10 strokes hard at your different kind of bursts or focus points to the race. But I would think, drive. And so I'd be thinking about my legs and power when I was thinking drive. Or a different race, I would think send, which is really thinking about the finish and accelerating the boat. But it was just one word. And every time I just kind of put the blade in, put the blade out, I would repeat the word to myself in my head. And focusing on that simple mantra that one word that would encompass everything that I was trying to achieve in the race, really, I think helped me get in the zone and helped contribute to my success.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, it's another side of things that people don't see. And again, I mean, I'm always trying to think of these questions from a different point of view than what people are used to hearing. And we've definitely gone in depth. And I love the superhero thing that you mentioned right at the beginning about the kids, because I was thinking that, I mean, it's got to be such a conversation changer of when it comes up, you're an Olympian, if people don't know, if you're sort of at a birthday party or something very mundane, and so what do you do? Oh well, by the way, and and it comes up. That must be a very cool perk of your achievements as well. But
yeah, it's a bear. Sometimes at the dog park, it came up recently, and I've been going to the same dog park since I got the dog in COVID, and I wore some piece of USA gear. And I live in Boston. There are a lot of Cambridge. There are a lot of rowers, so I think some people knew who I was, and then someone saw the USA jacket and asked someone else, and then they knew, and someone came up to me and was like, oh my gosh. And it's funny because it's something I'm really proud about, but it's also something that kind of flusters me, and I get embarrassed out of context because I don't know because I don't think it's what people expect. I don't think they expect Olympians to be a random person standing at the dog park. I don't think they expect it to be someone they encounter in their everyday life. And I've had other people say, you're the first Olympian I've met. And my response is always, I'm the first Olympian you've met, but there are a lot of us out there, and you'd probably be surprised.
wow, there we are. There's a lot of us out there. That does sound a little bit superhero-like, doesn't it? They walk amongst us and all the rest of it. But no, it's yeah, that's cool. I just sort of got the vibe that must be something that happens, and it's
Yeah.
part of the fun. But I really admire how humble you are and everything. And every Olympian that I've met, and it's quite a few, has been that way. But it is a really good thing. Anyway, not going off topic into that, with your medicine and your work helping people and contributing to people's lives in that way, starting at the beginning, well, it's not really the beginning, but one facet I'd like to touch on is actually how you juggled that. How on earth, given what you were just explaining about the amount of hours and the amount of dedication, that your sport takes. Obviously, medical school is a massive undertaking as well. So at that point in time, did you sleep at all, or did that just sort of go out the window at that point in time?
I mean, I love sleep. So my now husband would say she definitely would not sacrifice her sleep for anything, even those goals. Um, I A lot of it was prioritization. So I knew I wanted to be a doctor before I even started rowing. I went to an orthopedic surgeon for help with my knee in 8th grade and walked out of his office and said, "That's what I want to do when I grow up." And I'm a person who's very stubborn. I don't even remember going to this doctor, but I do remember in high school thinking, maybe being a doctor is something I want to do. Going to take a senior to work day, I went with a doctor, said, "Oh, this is awesome. Maybe I do want to be pre-med in college," and followed that track through. Um, and when I tried out for Beijing, I knew that I'd be taking a year off after college to do the application process because I didn't have time my senior year, and trying out for Beijing seemed the natural fit to slip into that year. And that I also was loving rowing and successful at that and got invited to the camp. And so what I did, as I mentioned, like when I returned to Boston as an 8, I did not think that returning to elite rowing was in the picture. I kept doing it for fun, and then one that had the Charles and said, "We want to do this seriously." At which point I had to start thinking about the logistics of it, because it's true, you can't, both medicine and being a doctor really do demand 100% of you, not just in time, but also in dedication and like where your focus is and what you want your mind and body to achieve. And they're similar in some ways because they both require a lot of persistence and hard work, but they're also very different in other ways, just the physical nature of rowing, as you can imagine. So when I knew that I did want to try for the Olympics, I approached the deans at the School of Medicine and said, I think this is something that I want to do, and I don't think I can do it with medicine. Is time off something in the cards? And they were amazingly supportive. I think not every medical school would have embraced this medical student who had this big, bold dream, and not sure at that point, no one knew if I'd actually make the Olympics. Like I hadn't made it in Beijing. It was a far off goal. It was a maybe, and I had been somewhat successful, but there are no guarantees, and I didn't have any data to put behind that goal at that point. No, nothing to point to that said, like, if I take this time off and if you let me do this, then I will make the Olympics. It was I think I want to do this because it's something I care about. And I think that I will regret not doing it later in life. And kudos to them for being wonderfully supportive and kind of creating the ideas for me and how to make it work. And so typically in medical school, some people take time off to work on their PhD research. So we have MD PhDs, and they take a break between second and third year of medical school to focus on their research. And the deans worked that into my schedule and made that happen. They said, this is a natural break. You take a big, what we call a step one, or one of our big exams at the end of second year. And that's when the classroom time ends and we go into clinical rotations. This is a kind of natural breaking point. This is when our PhD students take time off. So take step one and then take the 2 years to the Olympics at that point and come back. And it's funny because I don't think it, in my head at that point, I realized how important it was to have 2 years training full time. In retrospect, you need 2 years to train full time, but just in terms of getting your body up to speed takes about a year, and then fine tuning everything. And you want to be at the level you want to be at in that like first summer, which you're not really, or 1 year into the thing, I would say, the summer. But there's so much process involved, and there's so much time, and there's so much muscle mass to be gained, and strength and technique, that most people do it full time all the time. So most of the rowing Olympians now train full time 4 years straight. Sometimes people take a year off at the beginning of the quadrennial, so the first year off is doing work. Most people do not take more than that. There are exceptions. Having Helen Glover, the Brit who's been very successful, is a fabulous exception to the rule. She's really taken time off to be a mom in 2 year segments, but pretty unusual. And really commend my deans, because I think I probably would have said, oh, I can maybe try to do this in 1 year. And I don't think I would have been able to do it in 1 year. I think I really did need the 2 years to get up to speed and to be ready for a competition at the Olympics. And so I did. I at that natural stepping off point, which they recommended, I started taking time and rowing, focusing on rowing. So when I was focusing on medicine, I was focusing on medicine. I was in class, whatever it is, 8 hours a day, and I would go to the boathouse and I would fit in as much training as I could fit in. Um, I didn't have any, I was in a single, so I didn't have any teammates. I didn't have to make it to practice a certain time, which gave me the freedom to really make the best use of time, in that I wasn't waiting around for anyone. And when I was there, I was just doing it. I like got in, I got out. It was very efficient. And I didn't do much else. I would go home and I would study. And on weekends, maybe I would do something social. But it was funny. I talked to my med school friends and they would play video games, or they would do this or do that. And like the time that everyone needs to decompress was the time that I was using to row during school. And then I took the 2 years off, focused on rowing, did some laboratory work on the side. But once I made that switch, rowing was the priority. And so I was prioritizing rowing, and before I'd been prioritizing school. And then when I returned to school in August of 2012 after the Olympics, I kind of made that switch again. And I was like, you know what? I'm focusing on school again this time. And it was harder in clinical rotations. And it was about 6 months in that I thought, maybe I want to row again. Maybe I want to keep doing this. And I had been fitting it in when I could. And some rotations are really hard. I mean, in my surgery rotations, I wasn't working out because you have to be there at 5 a.m. and you leave the hospital at 7 p.m. and there's no time. So I was doing things like running up the stairs instead of taking the elevator, or I would do these like little squats in the operating room when I was holding the retractor, like these little one-legged squats or random things to kind of just get some muscle activation during the day. And then again, when I graduated, I took that time and I said, now I'm switching again, like I'm focusing on rowing. And I will say that in med school, like there were rotations like surgery where I had no time to train, and I probably trained once or twice a week for a period of 8 weeks. But there also were rotations like my psychiatry rotation where I was in the hospital for 3 to 4 hours a day. So I could work out twice a day because I had so much more time. So it depended, and I fit it in where I could. And then when I was focused on rowing, I was really focused on rowing. And that kind of continued through the years. The more clinical work there was, the less flexibility there was in terms of fitting rowing into my schedule. But I will say one of the amazing things, and one of the reasons I think that I ended up pursuing emergency medicine, is that it's shift work. And we work 8 or 9 hour shifts, which means 9 or 10 hours in the hospital at a time. And that they're weird hours. We work more nights and more weekends and more afternoons, but it still gives you time outside that to do whatever you want to do. And so I could get out on the water and go rowing the majority of the time. I would say most days, even though the hospital's exhausting, I could get out and do something. And there were times where even during my intern year, I couldn't, even though I was in emergency medicine. Like we just spend 2 weeks on labor and delivery. And when we were doing that, we were working 14-hour days, and it was all nights, and you feel crummy. And I have a rowing machine and had it on my porch. And I think I worked out 80 minutes total during each of those 2 weeks on labor and delivery. So there were times where it was worse than others, but I think that also makes me appreciate it more when I go back to rowing and have the freedom to really take the time doing it. Because when you're not able to do something and have that restraint, you want to do it more. So being limited to those 20, 40-minute windows of time made me think, oh, I want to be on the erg more. I want to work harder. Like I want to have more time to do this. And it just helped fire me up when I would switch to the rowing full time, and really made me appreciate having the time to take a nap and the energy and the focus to really prioritize rowing.
Absolutely amazing. I mean, I know you said earlier about these kids, and they didn't expect a superhero, but that level of time management is a bit superhero-like, where it's a little bit well, it's extraordinary. But again, there's some very valuable lessons there, and it really shows what's possible with the right level of commitment. So I absolutely massive respect to you on that, really.
Thanks.
I'm mindful of time with your time, and this has gone by in a flash. So what I'll say is I'll say the last couple of things now, depending on obviously where it goes. Obviously now that you are in that role, and now that you are a doctor and you are doing, you've achieved that dream, it would be good to just get what you consider to be the most rewarding aspects of that role, because it's something that people will have their opinions on, their stereotypes of, and various things. But again, getting this from your view of what it's actually like, helping people in that way, I'd imagine, as you've described, there's sort of a stressful side, but there's this really rewarding side as well, because your face lights up when you talk about it in that way. Even though I feel for you with the length of hours. So yeah, I mean, what do you enjoy most about it? It might sound an obvious question, but it's going to be a good topic to get into.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of different things. I think in emergency medicine, we get to treat all different types of people for all different types of things. And we treat newborns through people who are dying, like in front of us. And we treat men and women, old and young. I mean, we said old and young, baseline healthy, baseline sick. It's all races, all socioeconomic backgrounds, people who come from everywhere. And I think we have the privilege of not worrying about health insurance, which in this country, in a lot of specialties, you need pre-authorization and you go to your segment of your network or this or that. And in emergency, they come in the door and we treat them. And I think that is a privilege that we get to do that without worrying about costs, without seeking out these patients. They come to us. They want to see us, whether they think they want to see us or not when it comes to the wait times. But and some people are angry about the wait, and some people are angry about what's going on in their life and their illness. And we get the chance to help them. And, we don't fix a lot of people. I think a lot of people come to us for answers, and some people come to us with months of belly pain that they've been having, and they think that we might have the answer on that day, and frequently we don't. We have to send a lot of people home with please follow up with your primary care physician. We haven't figured out what's going on, but we've ruled out all the things that we think could kill you in this moment. And that is really frustrating. At the same time, we go into it knowing that we might not have those answers, whether the patient expects that or not, but we go in knowing we might not have the answers, but that we might have a chance to making the process of being sick easier for people. And I think and sometimes we get to fix people, and it's really fun to fix people. Like when someone has like a piece of glass stuck in their hand and you can take it out, or when someone has an pneumonia and you can give them antibiotics and you can make them feel better. Like those are the fun days where you can say like, oh, I made that person better. But a lot of the time, the making them better is the process of making them feel better, whether it's the head more than the body. And I think it's a really special job to be let into these stressful moments of people's lives and to be able to help them in that way. And I think I love it because we get to do that, and because it's always interesting. Every patient is interesting. Every person is interesting. Everyone comes from different places, even if they might be really unhappy with us in the time being. And, we get the patients every shift. I had a shift last night, and we have patients who, especially some of our psychiatry patients, who say, I don't want to be here. You're forcing me to be here. I'm going to sue the hospital. You're going to lose your job. And they're not in the right state of mind to acknowledge that they need that treatment. And it's really frustrating. And sometimes you walk out of the room and you're like, oh my gosh, why did I do this? And you just want to cry. But you push through, and so many more of the patients do say thank you and are appreciative. And that, I don't know, or I know that we're doing it for the right reasons, which is, it's just, yeah, it's always interesting and it's always challenging, and you get to touch people, which I think is a really special position to be in.
Absolutely. It's an amazing insight into what you do. And it's just something I really wanted to ask you, because personally, I feel that helping people is one of probably the highest sort of thing that people can aspire to do in life, doing something that's beyond ourselves, beyond our own lives, if you will. So touching on that, amazing. And it's sort of a very intimate description in a way that you've given of what you do. And I really like that. And I really like the human aspect of that from your side, but also from the people that you're helping and basically saving. So amazing. So the last thing, as I said, being mindful of your time, and this has gone over the time I aim for, but that's great because we've got into some fantastic topics. So I'm just very grateful to you. So the last thing is you've achieved everything that you've achieved in your life so far, obviously with rowing, obviously with the medicine side of things, with so many things. So when it comes to your future and what you'd like to do next, excuse me if I'm sweating, by the way, it's so humid over here today. It's like in the 90s. Anyway, but yeah, what you'd like to do next, in your life, that's really the next thing. And I know it's a big topic again. That's been a theme of today. But just what motivates you and what inspires you from here in your next steps, basically.
Yeah, and part of the time is definitely my fault because I know that I'm a wordy person when I talk.
Wonderful,
So
though. I love everything you shared, and this has honestly super exceeded my expectations. So there's no complaints from me at all. Absolutely wonderful what we've
okay,
got into. So
thank you.
you know,
Thank you.
yeah,
Um, so I will not be one to deny that I am terrible at change. I think one of the reasons I've kept doing what I do for so long is that I got to be a student athlete for a really long time. I mean, I started being a student athlete in high school and I got to be one in college. And then I said, I think I can do this at a level more. And so I went to med school and trained and was basically a student athlete again for the next 12 years. 13 with COVID, I got that bonus year. And there have been times where I've had to react to some change. In the Tokyo quadrennial, I rode the double because I didn't win the single trials. And that was a change that got some getting used to, but ultimately ended up being just an amazing experience in so many different ways, being in a boat with someone else and racing in Tokyo with a partner who I really respect and love training with, and who brought a new energy, enthusiasm to me for the sport. So I was at the kind of the end of my career. She was the beginning of hers, and renewed my energy and enthusiasm and my love for everything I got to do. So it was hard at first, kind of thinking you're going to do it one way and then having things happen a different way. Um, and now stopping rowing it's challenging. And I say stopping rowing, and it's funny because I still row 2 to 4 times a week. I was out there on Saturday, and I row with a group once a week. And it's the same group that I trained with, the Masters men, when I was rowing. But it's different, and it's a bit like losing a part of myself because elite rowing in that singular pursuit of gaining speed and being the fastest I could be. Now I do it for fun and staying fit and the enjoyment of the sport and because I love it, but it's very different. And that change has been hard. Um, I still love rowing and I am so appreciative for medicine because it takes so much dedication as well and so much focus. And so it absorbs me in a way that I think it's been easier to get over the loss of rowing. Um, it's still me. It's still hard. The change is still hard. And I still have these days where I think about like, oh, what if and this or that. And I miss it. So I acknowledge that change is hard for me. And now I'm coming up on the end of residency. And so the student athlete part of my life is really over in June, in a month, when I graduate, which is crazy. And almost in my head that even though I haven't been rowing seriously for almost 2 years now, the graduation from residency really is a closing chapter on this student athlete because I was rowing and during a part of residency. So I kind of like loop it all together in one, I don't know, one bracket, one category in my head. And so I have other things to look forward to, but I know that change is hard. I think that I adapt to that by trying to include the things that are important to me in my life. And so I'm doing a sports medicine fellowship next year at the University of Utah. So I've lived in Boston the large majority of my life. So moving very much outside my comfort zone in terms of going to Utah with my husband and our dog, and focusing on sports medicine because that is the way that I can incorporate rowing into my life still. And so what I hope is to keep doing emergency medicine because obviously I care about it and that will continue to be part of my life. But by doing sports medicine, I can keep working with US rowing and continue working with rowing and helping other people achieve the goals that I have gotten to achieve. And I think that will be really rewarding to get to give back to the rowing community in that way. And hopefully to continue to give back to the rowing community in the ways that I am now in terms of talking to juniors and working with clubs and doing the casual things. But being one of the team positions will really is one of my goals. And it really, in my head, I think it will just tie together those things that I love and feel passionately about. And so it's change, and change is hard. But I am excited about that. And I have my husband who's been very supportive of everything, and we got married last August. So that's relatively recent. And so that also helped. Like that was a new step in life when you're training. Some of your relationships seem a little bit one-sided because so much has to focus on your sleep and your eating and your travel and your training cycle. And there's just not a lot of flexibility. And not that there's a lot of flexibility in residency, but a little bit more in some ways. And so starting that new chapter with him as well, I think in getting married was that one was an easy change to make. So that was an exciting one. And starting that chapter of our lives together is another thing to kind of look forward to, be excited about.
Absolutely. Well, it's the future is very bright. Let's put it that way. Good luck with Utah and the move and everything. Congratulations on getting married as well. I did see the photo on your Instagram. I thought, well, that's lovely, So congratulations. And maybe, Gevvie, I just want to thank you for your time today. I mean, as I've mentioned, obviously we've gone over, but thank you for your time. Thank you for being an open book as well. I mean, a total open book about so many things. Even though I'm sure you're used to doing these, there's still some quite personal topics that have come up. So I appreciate you being an open book about that. And just thank you for everything, basically. That's all I can say. It's exceeded my expectations and then some. And I've had a lot of fun, and I hope you have as well.
Yeah, thanks for having me. They were great questions. It's fun to talk about. And as you know, I still feel passionately about it. So I love talking about it. And hopefully this will inspire another group of people to aim high and to have fun along the way.
Absolutely. I'm sure it will. There's been some amazing nuggets of wisdom that you've shared, and I'm sure the impact on people will be absolutely incredible. So thank you again. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.